In this example, we're going to show you how to create the sign design you can see on the screen. We'll take a look at a wide variety of tools to create, edit and distort the vectors. Plus we'll also demonstrate the importing of a hand-drawn image that we will then use to trace vectors around. So this is where we need to go, but let's start by creating a new part. So File, New, and in this case it's going to be a single-sided job. Our width is going to be 19 inches, our height is going to be 9, our thickness is 3/4 of an inch, our Z0 position will be from the material surface, and our XY data will be in the center of the workpiece. So I have my rectangular job, and now I need to start adding some vectors to it. So from the drawing menu, I'm going to select the Draw Circle command, and immediately I'm faced with the center point and the diameter or radius. I'm happy with the center point at 0, 0, but my diameter needs to be 8. So as I apply that now, we have a circle, diameter 8, center 0, 0. I'm going to close out that form and go into the Draw Rectangle option now. And similarly, the anchor point is correct at 0, 0, and I could specify my width and height. But an alternative is to come across to that center point now, and holding the Alt key down on the keyboard, I can just grow a circle, and notice it's growing in positive and negative around that center point. And I'm just going to grow that out now across to 18 and increase the height up to 4. Just there we go. So where my cursor is, it's showing the width of 18 and a height of 4. So I can let that go. You can see on the form now we have a width of 18 and a height of 4, and I can just close that out. I now need to look at modifying this rectangle. Some of the points I need to move into new positions. So to do that, whilst it's selected, I'm just going to hit N on the keyboard, which will take me into the node editing mode. You can see the 4 corner points of the rectangle, but what we want to do is to modify the midpoints. If we come across onto that top line there, you can see in this central position a sort of light grey circle which denotes the midpoint. Now what I need to do is to turn that into a physical point that I can then modify its parameters. So I'm simply going to hover over it, right mouse key, insert a point, then I'm going to go over it again, right mouse key, properties, and it's going to give me currently what that absolute position is, which is at x0, y2. Now I know that I need to move that down by 0.5 of an inch. So I'm just simply going to select that and say I want an absolute position of 1.5 and apply. Okay, so let's move that down by ½ an inch to y1.5. An alternative way of doing that actually is to come over the cursor. You can see the cursor change as I come to the lower midpoint here. So I'm just going to hover over that now, and with the left mouse key I'm just going to hold it down, then move it along the axis, and I can move it up by 0.5. Okay. Alternatively, I could have picked the point, moved it up, and just hit 0.5 on the keyboard with a return, and that would have moved it up by 0.5 in the direction that I was moving it. Okay, so I'm just going to come out of that with escape on the keyboard, and we're going to look to offset that now. And so I'm going to reselect it. It's shown as dotted. Come across to the offset and layout and select the offset command, and we're going to go inwards now, and this is going to be by 0.8 of an inch. Okay, so offset that inwards, and now I'm going to look to trim out some of this region in the middle, okay, because we don't need some of it. Some of it will be placed with some text later on. So I now need to come across now and create some what I would call construction lines. So I'm just going to come to this sort of meeting point of the circle and the outer border here, and drop down to the lower left hand position, hit space on the keyboard, which will take me out of the command but without closing the form, and then come across and create a new line from top to bottom there, and just close out the form. I now need to trim out these sort of central lines, internal lines here, so I'm going to come across to the edit objects and the interactive trim command, pick that out and just trim out those two pieces. Okay, so the next stage, I now need to offset my outer circle and bring that in basically by 1.1 inch. So I'm going to come back to the offset command now and bring that inwards by 1.1, and you'll see that now presented on the screen. Okay, and with that I'm now just going to trim out once again the two pieces either side of the circle that are within our vectors. So I'm going to select the interactive trim and pick out those 2 points. So we've got those correct now, and also I can delete out my 2 lines here that I don't need because they were just for construction use. So with that now, I'm in a position to start moving some of these vectors onto different layers. Okay, so with this now, I'm going to select this two sort of offset partial vectors and our two internal circles, and I'm going to move them onto a new layer, and that new layer happens to be called construction. And I'm going to switch it and make sure it's not shown as visible, so you'll see it immediately switch off the screen when I hit OK. If I come up to the form now, you should be able to see that we do have that construction layer, and I also have layer 1. So I'm going to go to layer 1 and just call that outline, okay? And that is currently still the active layer. And whilst I'm there, I'm just going to take this now and take these two items, and essentially what I want is I want to remove the 4 internal pieces, so I've just got the perimeter, and the easy way of doing that rather than interactive trimming is to come across to the weld command, which will just give me the perimeter of those two vectors, so we can see that there. So I'm now faced with this one single outer border that I now need to offset inwards. So with that, I'm just going to select the vector, come across to the offset command, and I'm going to go inwards by a distance now. In this case, it's going to be just 0.2 of an inch, and I want to create sharp corners to make sure that I've got a nice crisp sharp corner in this region here. And we're going to select the new one because I'm now going to offset the new one again after that. So with that, I offset, and I'm just going to come back up to the form whilst that one's selected, and I'm going to offset that again in by 0.1. So I've created those 3 vectors now, okay, which have all been placed on the outline. So with that now, I'm going to come across and just switch outline off, okay, switch construction on, okay, and I'm also going to add a new layer now, which is going to be called text, and we're going to make that the active layer, ready to start adding some new features. Okay, so we're now ready to start adding some details to our design, in which case we're going to add 5-star coffee in terms of text, with the 5 being placed within this rectangle on the left hand side, the coffee running along the bottom arc, and then star in our right hand rectangle. The 5 and the star will be distorted to the shapes, and across the top we will have a row of stars. So with that, I now need to create my first donor star. So I'm going to come across the create vectors menu and select the star. We're presented with a form where I can add the parameters, or I'm just going to go to the screen, left mouse key, and just grow the arc now and just drop it in that position. Come across to the form, which now has those values, and I'm going to specify just a smaller outer radius of just 0.5 and apply that. And if we actually zoom in, you can see that the lines are running at an angle, and I would like my top line to be horizontal. And to do that, I need to lower my inner radius percentage to 38.2 and just apply that. Okay, so with that, I now have my donor star ready to be wrapped along the curve. So with that, I'll hit shift on the keyboard, pick the top arc, come across to the copy along vectors in the offset and layout part of the drawing menu, and select the number of copies option. Now in this case, I want the central star to be in the middle, and obviously the 2 either side, so it works well that we would have 5 wrapped along the top. So as I copy those now, you can see that they've nicely distributed along the curve, but I'm not so happy with the way they're orientated, because as you can see here, the top of my donor star is actually on the underside of the arc. So it's as if we want to flip all of the stars through sort of 180 degrees. So that's what I'll do now. I'll reverse the direction and then copy, and now you can see we have them nicely distributed on our curve. So with that, I'm just going to close out that form and delete out that arc, and now we're going to get ready to add some text. Okay, so let's go across to the draw text menu and open the form. I'm simply going to click on the screen roughly where I want my text to start, and I'm just going to check the options, which are text height is 0.8, and I'm just going to start by typing 5, hit return on the keyboard, star, hit return on the keyboard, coffee. Okay, now before I close the form down, I do need to change the font type, so I'm going to hit the drop down menu and select T on the keyboard, which will drop me into all the T's, and I'm going to select Times New Roman, and we can see that's been immediately updated on the screen, and I'm just going to close out of the form. Now it's currently in the wrong position, and actually if I select it you can clearly see that it's one single piece, but I actually need this to be 3 separate pieces. Okay, so in order to do that I can right mouse key over the text and select break text block into lines. You can see here that we now have 3 separate entities. With that I can now select the 5, click it again to put it into transform mode, hold the left mouse key over the center, and you can see I'm now moving it around with respect to that center point, and I'm going to come across, hover over the center line, then move left and find the midpoint of the rectangle. Once I've found that, you can see the cursor changes and I will let go. I'll do the same now with the star and the right hand rectangle, so put it into transform mode, move it across, and then hover over the center point and let go. And for the coffee, what I want to do is to wrap it along this bottom arc. So with that I'm now going to select the coffee, shift on the keyboard and select the arc over which I want to wrap the text, and come over to the text on a curve command, which is under the create vectors menu. So with that I immediately see a representation on the screen. You can see it's on the underside of the arc and it's in reverse direction. So I want this to be on a curve, okay, which is one thing, and I want it to be on the other side. Okay, so now we have it sort of in the correct orientation, but clearly we can see the spacing is incorrect. So with that now I can increase the spacing until I get it more to my liking, so I can just increase that up and we can see that we're getting it roughly about right. Okay, but I may want to come in now and actually further modify the amount of spacing, because as you can see the distance between the C and the O and the O and the F looks a little greater than between the sort of F's and the E's by the nature of the type of text. So with that I'm going to come out of that now, and with that text selected I'm just going to come into the edit text spacing, okay, and move across to the text. As you can see here my cursor slightly changed with the T on it, and as I get across to the in between the 2 letters we can see the 2 arrows are pointing towards each other, which means I will then obviously reduce that. Okay, and I'm just going to reduce it on the O and the F, but notice it's sorted out the spacing at either end, so we've got our coffee still evenly distributed along our arc with the center point right in the center of the arc itself. Okay, so we're now ready to take the 5 and the star and to distort their shape in order to fit the vectors they're currently sat within. So we're going to take the 5 vector here, for instance the text, and distort it to match the top line here and the bottom line, so essentially it will be tapered within. And in order to do that we need 2 separate vectors, so I'm going to select the sort of 3/4 rectangle here, and we need to remove the left hand edge. So whilst it's selected I'll hit N on the keyboard, and then for the span that we want to remove, which is between these 2 points here, just hover over that edge, right mouse key and say delete span. I can do the same on the other side, selecting the vector, right mouse key on the edge that I don't want and delete span. So we're now in a position to take the text 5 and distort between the 2 vectors. So to do that you select the text first, then shift and pick the first vector, and then keep the shift down and select the second vector and come into the distort tool, which is under transform objects, and immediately it says that everything is correct and we have 3 separate options to select. The third option between 2 curves is the one that I need for this particular operation, so I'm going to select that now and hit apply on the keyboard. But as you can see there my text has been reversed, okay, and this is due to the fact that the nodes on my vectors are pointing in the wrong direction. So with that I'm going to close this down now and hit Ctrl Z on the keyboard, and I will now go and take a closer look at the vector. So I'm going to select it and then hit N on the keyboard, and we can see that it's currently running from right to left and we would like it running from left to right. So I'm just simply going to say make this the start point and do the same on the top, make this the start point, and then come back into the command with selecting the vector, the text, shift pick the lower curve and the top curve into the distort command. Okay, I've got between 2 curves options and specify apply, and we can see that we have modified that. Now if I zoom in a bit more closely we can see that the V is actually slightly bigger, so it's maintained that the V fits between the 2 vectors, but clearly you can see there's a small gap under the F, the I and the E, which we need to address. So in other words, ideally we would like the V just hanging off the edge slightly. So with that I can go to transform object now and simply just drag this down a little bit until it's on that line. You can see that there. I'm happy with that, and I can close out that form. So we have the text that is now being distorted to match the two curves. So going across to the star now, similarly I'm going to select the text, then shift and pick the lower curve, shift and pick the upper curve. So I have the three items, come into the distort tool, select the between two curves and apply. Everything looks okay. Once again we can see there are issues with the sizing. The A and the S are certainly larger on the top edge, and the S is larger on the bottom edge. So I'm just going to go into the transform object, and we're simply just going to move this up now until we get it roughly along that line, and do the same on the bottom. Okay, and just let go roughly around about there, and I can close out that form now and move it into view. And we're happy with what we've created there. We've distorted the 5 and the star to match the tapered vectors. Okay, so before we actually go ahead and import the scanned image in that will represent the coffee cup for the center, one thing I do need to do is to take our distorted 5-star text and just convert that, so bake it, so we can individually manipulate the letters at a later point. As you can see, they are single entities. If I come into the distortion command and I now need to just bake them into individual items, you can see that there. So I can edit them as separate entities and do the same with the star on the other side. So I'm going to come up to the tool and just bake that now. So with that set, I can now just switch off the construction lines because they're no longer needed, and we ought to think about really the coffee cup that's going to go into the center. So with that I'm going to add in a new layer called center graphic now, and make that the active layer, as you can see at the top of the screen. One thing I am going to do is just switch off the text. Okay, so switch that off. Center graphics still switched to be active, and I can come across to, under my file operations menu, select the import bitmap command. So with that I'm going to open up the form and read in the coffee mug.jpg, and you can immediately see that it's presented in the center of the screen. It's a simple scanned image with a few different colors. It's got sort of browns and some beiges, and some slightly sort of off grayish color, but essentially what we want to now do is to create vectors over the top of this so that we can use this for toolpathing at a later point. Now there are two different ways we can do this. One is to manually click points over the model and then to modify their nodes and tangencies, etc., so we can get an accurate fit, or we can try and use some of the automatic tools that we have to access. So with that I'm going to come across to the trace bitmap under the create vectors menu, and simply, whilst the image is selected, open the form, and I'm going to select, rather than the color option, I'm going to select the black and white, as this is essentially a sort of almost a two-tone-esque type image, therefore black and white lends itself correctly. And the number of colors here is immediately what you need to specify in terms of we are going to create a sort of darkened gray area that we're going to create the vectors around. As I reduce the number of colors, of course, I start to lose the image, and as I increase it, essentially it will be getting stronger, but then includes too much and eventually you lose it altogether. Okay, so we're looking for a balance there, and I think roughly around about halfway is correct. So we're now going to move down to the way the vectors are going to be fitted to that grey image. If we zoom in now, you can see that it's pretty rough in places. You can see there are some gaps here. Okay, we have some areas where there is quite a lot of noise still left. Okay, so it's going to be a little tricky to try and get some nice smooth vectors from this. So we can specify the amount of fit here. Now this is a very organic shape, so I'm going to keep this fairly loose all the way down to the bottom. Okay, and the noise filtering I'm going to have set quite high because I want to remove as many of these sort of smaller areas as possible, so we get just nice smooth single vectors. The bitmap fading is really for adjustment just for yourself when you're trying to view it. You can just change that now, but we have it roughly around about 50%. And we're going to group the vectors so they'll come out as one single entity that I can then ungroup if I need to do anything with them. So with that, I'm just going to preview that now, and we've got our representation. You can see here that even with the noise filter set at 7, we're still picking up little areas. If I increase that, we may get rid of more. Preview that. So yes, we have got rid of a couple more areas, but there's still some more that needs to be addressed. So with that, I'm going to apply that and close that form, and what we now have are vectors shown over the top of our underlying bitmap, and we can of course switch that on and off. Okay, notice that a new layer called bitmap has been created, because quite often once we've got the vectors correct, then we don't want to show the bitmap layer. Therefore we can switch that layer off, keeping the vectors on the screen, because the vectors will be on the center graphic. But in this case, I'm just going to leave that image on, okay, whilst we modify that, and we're going to look at really changing some of those vectors. So with that, I'm going to simply come in and take a look, and you can see there are some areas that I need to address. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is ungroup these. Okay, so right mouse key on that, and I'm going to ungroup these onto the group layers. So in other words, it's going to be ungrouped onto center graphic, the individual entities, and we have those now drawn on the screen. Okay, so I'm just going to switch off the image whilst we look to maybe rationalize these, because at the moment it looks a little bit jagged and we've got a few areas that need to be deleted. And if we actually take a closer look, we'll get to understand the number of points that are on these curves. So I'm going to select one of these now and go into the node editing mode, and you can clearly see there are lots and lots of individual points here, because it's tried to replicate the image that was being presented to us. So what I now need to do ideally is to look at rationalizing these by stripping out a lot of the points, which of course at the same time will strip out a lot of the problem. So I'm going to hit escape now to come out of the node editing command. I'm going to select all the vectors on the screen and come across to our curve fitting option. So I'm going to select that up now. We can see all the nodes displayed on the screen, and we're presented with the curve fitting options, of which you have circular arcs, Bezier or straight lines, and a tolerance. In this case, because we have a very organic shape, then the Bezier curve option would be the best option. So that's the one that's selected. Our tolerance we've got set to 30 thou, and we're not going to worry about keeping sharp corners, because I want this to be essentially an organic shape. And I've set replace vectors to be switched on, and I'm going to preview that. If we actually sort of zoom in, you'll get an idea of the difference. So if I preview that now, you can see that it's stripped out a lot of those points, and I'm just going to OK that now. And we can now, if I click on a single vector and go into node editing, you can clearly see there are very few points on there, thereby enabling me to make modifications far easier. Okay, so at this stage we really need to take a closer look and manually make some edits to these different curves. So with that, I'm going to come up now and just draw on the bitmap layer, okay, which can be shown on the screen there, and select one of the individual vectors, and then come into the node editing mode, and we can see exactly what we've got. Now we can see the underlying bitmap, and we can easily see how the vectors have been distorted to match that, but it means that we can just make some simple modifications here. So in this case, the green point, I'm just simply going to delete that out now, and then take the vector of the adjacent point and just change that to create a nice smooth curve on there. Moving up, we're going to look at sort of the steam coming off the coffee cup. There's a single vector there that was basically around a white area that was left on the bitmap. That can be deleted out, and we can look to try and maybe remove this area here. So with this, I don't really want to affect the vector before and after. So what I like to do is to sometimes add in a simple point either side, and then come in now and just simply delete out these individual points. Okay, I'm just going to need to zoom in and take out that point there as well. And we can see that we've not modified that area. We may want to just tweak this area just to make it a little smoother, although that will distort the shape at the top, but I'm still happy for that nice smooth shape. So coming back down now, I'm happy with the circle there. We can see actually there is one little individual vector that needs to be deleted out, but that's a fairly smooth top rim to the cup. Coming across to the handle now, we can see the inner part of the handle needs some modification. Once again, if I come in now, add in a simple vector point, which is I on the keyboard or right mouse key, insert a point. Okay, and I can simply come in now and just delete out these 2 points here, and that creates a little bit of a smoother curve that we've got there. The same at the top. Just to create this, I'm maybe going to add a point in about here, and then just delete out this top point here, just to make a little bit more of a sort of more better transition between those two. So I'm happy with that there. Coming down and around, we can see that the bottom is pretty good as well. So at this point I'm fairly happy with the vector that I've got, and I'd be happy to move forward and think about toolpathing this at a later point. So with that now, I'm just going to switch off basically the underlying bitmap, okay, and we're going to switch on the text, okay, that we've got there, okay, and similarly going to switch on the outline, okay. So we've got all the items together on the screen, but of course currently our coffee cup is way too big for the center of our sign. So I'm simply going to pick those items up. I'm actually going to come out of the node editing mode, pick the extra items, so we've got all of our coffee cups selected, then click it again one more time with the left mouse key to put it in the transform mode, hold the shift key down because I want to scale this in X and Y. I'm just going to bring this down now to about there, and then just move it down, okay, so we're looking about there, maybe apply a tiny bit of rotation to it, okay, and at that point I'm happy that my coffee cup is approximately where I need it to be before I move through to machining. So with that, there is a related video that goes with this presentation which covers the tool pathing for this particular sign, which can be found in the related videos. But at this point now we can move ahead and actually save the file ready for machining. So save as, and I'm going to pick this, and it's going to be called the vectordrawing.crv file, and I'll save that, and we'll come to look at that later with the tool pathing.